Hey everybody, I'm Bridget Bianca and I'm a poet and professor from South Central Los Angeles. And you know what? I have always introduced myself the same way. Always poet first and then professor, which is technically the order of things, but I became a poet in middle school like most people, and the professor thing didn't happen until way later, but thanks to the influence of my grandmother who taught for 30 years, I have always known that I was destined to be a teacher. So today I'll switch things up in her honor. Hi, I'm Bridget Bianca, and I'm a tenured professor and a poet from South Central Los Angeles. Okay, feels better. This fall marks the beginning of my 15th year in the profession, and I find myself doing a lot of reflecting. But before we get into my advice to you on this episode about life after the MFA, especially if you plan on being a professor, let me share a bit of my story.
Welcome to the Poetry Lab podcast. The Poetry Lab started 11 years ago to help dedicated, self-taught, and formally trained writers find a place in their community to write, read, learn, and collaborate. We help writers tap into their craft with radical self-compassion, unlike anything you've ever seen in a creative writing classroom before. If you're a creative person trying to establish a writing practice in the real world, this podcast is designed to help you carve out the time, the courage, and the inspiration to keep writing your new shit. Are you ready, poet? Let's get into it.
I attended a very prestigious historically black college for undergrad, the illustrious Howard University, the Mecca, the Hilltop, the real HU, and yes, that's the full name. You have to say the full thing, just like a Tribe Called Quest or a pimp named Slickback. But anyway, during my time at Howard, I felt fulfilled in so many ways, but I also met my first taste of inadequacy. Namely, when people would ask me what the heck I plan to do with a degree in English, which I always found so puzzling when the legacy of Howard was bursting with alumni like Zora Neale Hurston and Toni Morrison and Amiri Baraka. Surely an English major like me was destined for greatness. I mean, I said so in my personal statement when I applied to the school. Oh, to have the confidence of a 17-year-old BB. But there at the Mecca of Black excellence, I was surrounded by the future captains of industry, doctors, lawyers, CEOs, and future presidents. Most of the other English majors had their sights set on law school. My dreams of being a professor at a community college felt small. So I kind of kept it to myself. Senior year, I found myself elbow deep in applications to assorted doctoral programs with hopes of coming out on the other side of the requisite 5 to 7 years with a degree that would allow me to be a professor. And then I stumbled upon Ethelbert Miller, a famed poet and self-proclaimed literary activist. Well, actually, he kind of stumbled upon me. You see, I was sitting on the floor of the Historical Founders Library, texting while waiting for a professor. Legs outstretched, I almost tripped Mr. Miller as he came down the hallway. I apologized, and he asked me if I wanted to have a seat in a chair inside of the office he was on his way to open up. Apologetic, I gathered my things and rushed inside of what I now know was a cultural center at Howard. I'd never been in there, despite wandering all over campus for years. And I didn't know who the man was either at the time, but the room and the man showed up when I needed them. He sat with me for a bit and we chatted. I asked him all kinds of questions about the center, and he asked me about my major. And then he asked me my plans for the future. You know, the usual stuff. And as usual, I delivered my usual answer. I don't know, teach, with a little shrug. But unlike most people I encountered, he asked follow-up questions. He asked me if I was a writer, and I said, yes, a poet. Again, dear listener, I didn't know I was speaking to a poet that I'd read and studied on that very campus, which is good because I would have fangirled and missed what came next. After telling him I was applying to doctoral programs so I could be a professor, he asked me why I didn't go for an MFA in creative writing. It was a terminal degree, he explained, and I could teach with it, particularly at community colleges. I'd never heard of an MFA in creative writing before in my life. It never even crossed my mind as an option. It was like the sun breaking through the clouds. By the end of the day, I was back in my dorm, shoving those doctoral applications into a drawer and on the phone, telling my mama I'd be home for a gap year while I prepared for the MFA. What's an MFA? They asked me. I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. So I became a college level instructor at 23 years old while still in my MFA program at a private art school. By 30, I was the youngest tenure track professor in the English department at a local community college, which, believe it or not, was my dream, really. I'd taken community college classes here and there while in high school and undergrad, and I knew that CCs were where I could stand in the equity gap that threatened to gobble up the dreams of so many kids that look like me. And I'm so proud of the work I get to do there. The pay and the health insurance aren't too bad either. For what it's worth, I mentioned being a poet when I interviewed to get this job. The disinterest was thick enough to scoop with a spoon. Unlike major universities, I didn't need to publish anything, academic or otherwise, to beef up a tenure portfolio. I just needed to teach and teach well, remain involved in department affairs, and maintain an active presence on campus. To my students, I was just Professor B, one of the few black professors in the department, the one with the cool blue hair or pink or purple, depending on the season. Being a poet didn't seem to matter much in my ivory tower, but it mattered to me. By the end of my first school year as a full-time professor, I had a manuscript of my own to shop around. This was big, dear listener. Huge. I'd spent the early years of my career laser focused on becoming the best professor so I could land an elusive full-time position and say bye-bye to freeway flying between three colleges. This determination, plus a healthy bit of MFA workshop trauma, which I'll save for maybe a different episode, meant that I hadn't really written anything in years. So it was no surprise that words started tumbling out of me the moment I was free to think and focus on just one job. That manuscript became my first collection of poetry, Be Trouble, which is now on its second edition, released the same year, coincidentally, that I received tenure. So, let's shift from me and shift to you. Nope, you. Let's talk about you. Don't click away from me now. It's your turn in the hot seat, dear listener. Let's talk about your dreams, especially if you have gone or plan to go the MFA route. We'll start with some questions to ask yourself. 1. The first one is a remix of a song you've heard before. If you're like me, you've likely been asked some variation of, what are you going to do with your life, your degree, your career? Maybe you've asked yourself that while staring into a computer screen as the blinking cursor mocked you, or to your blurry reflection while crying after another publication rejection, or across the table from your bestie at a Chili's while drowning your sorrows in buffalo dip. Okay, those were oddly specific, but you get me. And while this is a valid question, I don't think it should be the first question. The first question should be, who do you want to be? Yes, I'm arguing semantics, but you're a poet, so you know words mean things. Who do you want to be sounds a lot more sincere than what are you going to do? The latter feels accusatory. Instead, let's go with something that invites you to imagine, to dream. Who do you want to be? Me, I want to be a teacher and a writer. I wanted to help people with both things. And during those dark times before Obamacare, I also wanted to be a person with health insurance. Again, I cannot stress that enough. So instead of answering the what, answer the who. Embody it, own it, consider it daily. Revise the image. Speak in metaphors and similes if you have to, dear poet. 2. The second question takes us from dreaming to living. It's the how question. How will you sustain yourself along the way? We leave graduate school with dreams of writing full time and striking it big with an agent and a 6-figure publishing deal. Oh, and a movie or TV option. Unless that is, you are a poet, in which case you know our trajectory differs from our contemporaries in the prose and fiction side of things. There are likely no agents, no six-figure deals, and no TV movie adaptations in our immediate futures. So, our dreams will look a bit different. Replace agents with a community of writer homies, six-figure deals with featured poet spots, workshops, and podcast appearances, motion picture screens with mic stands and stages. Okay, sometimes there's no mic stand, and sometimes the stage is just a cleared out spot up front. Either way, we're there, and so is poetry. But there are also bills, rent, childcare, and a designer purse habit to support. We need money, a stable income that doesn't require us to sacrifice so much that we don't have time to write. That's something I forgot about when I first started teaching, but BB went through that so you wouldn't have to. So, how will you sustain yourself as a writer? Career counselors, bless their hearts, will tell you to pick something you are passionate about. We know, though, that it isn't always that easy for us writers. We have a passion, writing, but that doesn't always equal the kind of work that promises a W-2 in January. So, my advice instead is to choose a career that allows you to pursue your passions. Choose a job that leaves you room to think and create. And if you are lucky, pick a profession that encourages you to be creative in how you approach the tasks that fill your days. Ultimately, for me, that was teaching. But before it was teaching, it was working retail. I know that doesn't sound glamorous, but I told you before, my dream was to be someone who helps people. And I did that every day when I worked in plus size retail stores. For a while, doing that full time made me more money than being an adjunct professor. So I did both until I made the decision to focus wholly on the classroom. I would never tell someone to settle for a career just to pay the bills, especially not teaching. But I will always recommend pursuing whatever you choose with either passion or good reason, preferably both. So, you want to teach? Huh? Okay, well, this next part is for my folks who dream of clambering up into the ivory tower. If that's not you, still give this a listen because things may apply for you too. I'm no expert in being a professor, but I've mentored and trained a few, and my advice seems to pan out. First thing you need is to think about experience. If you are still in or about to enter an MFA program, look for opportunities to be a teaching or graduate assistant, a tutor, a classroom aide, or something along those lines. I purposely chose my MFA program because they advertised two tracks for work study. If you wanted it, teaching or publishing. If you chose the teaching track, you could possibly parlay being a TA into teaching your own class at the end. I also signed up to be a writing tutor on campus and did a short stint as a literacy tutor with my local public library. Some people go into teaching K through 12 first as a full-time teacher or a substitute. Others become private tutors or even volunteer their time leading workshops and offering homework help within community spaces. Experience proves to you that this is something you want and can do, and it lets schools know that you can handle the work. But let's say you don't have traditional experience in a classroom setting or even one-on-one with students. This is where your poetry brain kicks in. It is time to see your experiences as metaphors and similes, friend. What skills do professors need to have? Things like leadership, patience, routine, discipline, attention to detail, innovative thinking, and a growth mindset. Surely you can look at the work you've done and compare using like or as, right? Isn't a professor a manager leading their students through the shift? Now, if corporate was your first calling, can't a professor examine and assess data and come with a plan to address the needs of their students? Yeah, you see, you got the skills already. Now that you know you want to teach, here's number two. The question is, teach what? If you have the experience we talked about earlier, think about the subjects and lessons you took part in, as well as what you wish you had the opportunity to cover. What about the classes you took in undergrad and graduate school? Could you see yourself teaching those classes? Do you have the content knowledge or expertise? Before we go any further, I'll tell you from an insider's perspective that exclusively teaching creative writing, it just may not be an option, right? So what else can you teach? I spent the first 10 years of my career teaching every iteration of composition from developmental courses to senior thesis, with a few upper division electives in literature, social sciences, and even art history. How did I know I could teach those things? Because I researched, which is the next step. Number 3. Research, aka looking things up and then making them your entire personality for a few weeks. Or in this case, making them your career. The first thing I want you to research is less about what you know about your subject matter and more about what it is out there in academia, right? What's happening out there? What's going on in the job market? What are people teaching these days? Look at class schedules, course descriptions, teacher bios, and CVs. Ask your former professors and professor friends what their classes look like, okay? And I know you have professor friends now because you have an MFA, all right? Make a list of what you think you can teach and then look into the pedagogy behind those subjects. If you were lucky enough to be a TA in grad school, teaching pedagogy may have been part of your training. If not, it's up to you now. There are classes you can take, but you can also do your own research. Because I started teaching college classes pretty quickly, I trained myself. I got very familiar with scholarly journals through online databases and books on teaching. I signed up for the Chronicle of Higher Education and read the latest scuttlebutt about teaching. I also just kind of like saying the word scuttlebutt because I'm approximately 12 years old. You're welcome. Okay, let's go on. Scuttlebutt. Okay, my last tip here is maybe a little more practical. Find the job posting, then apply. Yes, I know that seems really simple, but you got to do it. Okay. And I know you don't feel like you're ready, right? You haven't transformed into your favorite professor from undergrad yet, and you are nowhere near as cool as Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society. But who is? You said you want to be a professor, right? Well, it's time to apply for the job, friend. Will you get the gig on the first swing? I can't promise that, but you will get practice and experience applying for a position in higher education, which is very different from any other job application. Remember that statement of purpose you wrote to get into your MFA program? We call that a cover letter now. Yeah. And I'm not talking about the 5-line thing you haphazardly typed up when you emailed your resume for your desk job. I mean a full narration of your educational and professional history up to this point, and how it has prepared you for teaching the classes that the institution you're applying to offers. Yeah, it's a bit more involved now, but you're a writer, and you know that drafting and revising is more than half the work of writing, so it's time to get to it. And your resume, it needs a little zhuzhing too, so it can become a curriculum vitae, or CV for short. This is more than just a list of where you worked and when. We need some details, right? We need to know more about the skills you utilized and the tasks you completed and the class you taught or whatever the case. But remember, you're a poet, so make it beautiful, babe. Academic postings also need recommendations at some point. So assemble your Avengers. Give them plenty of lead time to get the letter submitted so you're not playing chicken with your deadlines. Also, you should dust those transcripts off as well. Oh yeah, they want to see those transcripts too. They'll likely need an unofficial copy uploaded when you first apply and then official copies down the line. And let's say you get the call. The dean or the chair, whoever wants to meet with you for an interview. Yes. Now you get interview experience. Prepare for this, of course. Research and talk to those professor homies one more time. Go on the interview and pay very close attention. Even if you don't get this job, you need to learn from this experience. What kind of questions did they ask? If you fumbled something, why? That's just a space that you know you need to look into and maybe research a bit more about for next time. A lot of interviews require a teaching demo of some kind. This is where you show and prove that you can do this. And believe me, friend, you can. Actually, at least. So, start applying and keep applying. Well, dear listener, we have come to the end of my office hours for today. Thanks for listening and dreaming with me, and thank you for welcoming me to the Poetry Lab podcast. If you enjoyed what you've heard today, check out past episodes and be sure to like and follow us for more. If you really want a gold star in our hearts, share this with a friend to help us grow our community here. For more information about the Poetry Lab podcast, check us out at www.thepoetrylab.com/podcast. Talk to y'all later.